Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Title IX Insider. Today we have our special Lanie Bandell, attorney and I would say partner in crime when we discuss Title IX and all things related to all forms of civil rights discrimination. Today we're going to be discussing a special topic related to our big theme, which is Mother's Day. And we're going to be discussing how graduates should be preparing to now start either going to college or going into whatever graduate level schools they might be going to or beyond, and discussing what kinds of things to keep in mind. So if you've been liking what we've been doing, remember to press like and or potentially subscribe to us. So Lanie, hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
I know that you have a son, or are both of them graduating right now, or one of them
They
graduating?
are. I have one son who's graduating from high school and is going to be starting college next year, and another son who is graduating from undergrad, taking a gap year, and then going to medical school.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
exciting times. Thank you.
I know a lot of parents out there are also preparing to send their kids off, whether it be to junior high, high school, college, grad school, whatever it may be, or their very first job, in the real market. And I know that parents might be wondering or thinking to themselves, what should I say to my kids? What kind of conversations should we be having? Especially to keep them safe and to know their own rights, as individuals. So maybe we can start off by discussing that. Like, what are some things that, you and I both think about when parents might be thinking about graduation and those next steps for their kids?
Absolutely. And it's an important topic. And it's, one that, I'm not saying that I sit down and have formal meetings with my kids, nor would I suggest that. But in casual conversation, whether it's because my son left his phone down and I see the conversations that he has with his closest friends, I always tell my kids and their friends when, they're part of the conversation that, they have to be very careful. What you can say with your closest, most trusted friends is one thing, but when you go off to college or to a new school and you're, meeting a brand new group of people, you have to be very careful. Um, what you may view or the person may view as joking around may be taken very differently by the person receiving the message. So, there are certain graphics that are used that, kids think are funny. Some of them, may have some type of a sexual implication or just something that some people may not receive well. So I have always, in my work as a Title IX advisor, I've seen plenty of cases where text messages that, in and of themselves are harmless, and you can actually see the intent of the sender trying to either be funny, lighten the mood, or just, have what they perceive as a silly conversation, but the person receiving it took it much differently and ended up in a Title IX situation. So I think it's very important. And I always tell my kids that you have to be very cognizant of communications that you have with people, whether it's in writing or verbally. It's not like Title IX is only limited to things that we have evidence in writing. It can be conversation, and certain things can that we think are funny could be perceived as sexual harassment. So it's very important to have conversations with our kids, especially when they're going from high school to college and won't have the family support around, meeting all new people. To just be very aware that when you meet new people, you have to, there has to be a line.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I would add not just high school to college, but college to grad school and grad school to your next level, your first job. I've seen it in my positions where there is not just that Title IX, but Title VI component of that racial discrimination, where sometimes folks might be thinking, this is funny, it's a joke. I'm just messing around and I'm messing around with this individual and they know me. And then all of a sudden I get a complaint in, that this individual is being degrading. and or somebody's being offended, or if they feel offensive, types of remarks are really being geared maybe to somebody, and they're offended just by listening and walking by, just walking past it. They're not even involved, but they're offended. And
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And it brought something to mind. And I think a lot of times people don't know what allegations in these complaints look like and what we um, have to um, deal with in the hearings. And we went out for Mexican with the family over the weekend. And I walked by, there was a big group of people having a wonderful time. And I could overhear a gentleman saying something that could have been interpreted as racially insensitive, using an accent. Nobody in his party felt that way that I could see, and it otherwise seemed innocent, but it was obviously insensitive. And with with somebody coming along that takes offense to it, if that were in a college setting, you could end up in a Title IX. So again, I think because, and the reason it struck me is I actually had a Title IX complaint where the respondent that I was advising would speak in an accent and say things that he thought were funny, but the complainant did not find it that way. And so now he's having to defend. And I think everyone can agree that that's insensitive and inappropriate, but never knew that this could potentially derail his course of education. That's how important and what a big deal it is. And that's what I impart on my kids.
yeah, yeah, so true. I think it's the fact that sometimes, I'm going to say kids, but individuals, because I shouldn't just say kids, because of the fact that sometimes they're 18, 20, 21, 22. I know I've seen it, in the graduate level schools, where individuals just don't recognize or realize the impact of the things that they're saying. They think it's innocent, but it's not
Right.
necessarily innocent to somebody else. They might have gone through something pretty bad in their background, and I know individuals are going to say, well, how am I supposed to know that? Well, it's more about just remembering to be respectful in your environments, remembering that if somebody does feel offended, there is something called the civil rights. And that's where Title IX and Title VI and Title VII, Title IV, all these things, exist. And when these things exist and there's departments such as the Title IX office, are called, that's where, allegations and the complaints, and then, like you're describing, the hearings take place. And that situation that you're describing, that sounds like it was Title IX and Title VI
It is.
combination. Uh-huh.
It is. And something else struck me as funny when I first started getting into Title IX. I must have had a piece of paper or something on my desk, and my son said, "What does Title 1X mean?" I'm like, "You mean Title IX?" And it's just not in their vocabulary, nor should it be. I'm not, critiquing. It's not something that, you're learning in high school. You may hear it in the news or something about it. Um, but there does come a point where whether if it falls under Title IX, Title VI, that doesn't matter. It's the conduct that matters. And even, once you get away from education, all employers have, HR rules. So these are rules
Well,
for
seven.
life. Exactly. I mean, it's rules for life. And I think everyone is cognizant that, when I came into the workforce 30 years ago, boy, have things changed. When I look back at, how loosey goosey things were 30 years ago to today, you have to be willing to change with the times and recognize that conduct that you may not find offensive, somebody else may. And those are the types of situations that really can get, people into trouble.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's a great way to describe that first conversation piece that we're having, which is, what can parents say or do with their kids as they are transitioning from one stage to the other for education and then workplace, which is just make them cognizant of communication. Just be aware of the fact that someone around you can be offended and you just don't want to be accused of offending them. So be careful with your words, be careful with what you're saying. And like you mentioned early on, be careful what you're putting in those text messages too. That communication can really come back to bite you if you're not careful.
And social media posts. Even liking somebody else's post can come back to haunt you. So, watch as many TikToks as you want, I say to my kids, but you don't need to comment. And if, you know, it's very hard. A lot of kids want to participate in what they, perceive as gossip. And if something's going down on social media in the friend group, I tell my kids, zip the lip. Do not get involved because it could come back to haunt you. Now,
Mhm.
whether they do it or not, I don't know. We can only guide them. And what they do with the knowledge that we give them is up to them. But these are the types of things that I see in real life cases. And, serious repercussions can come from it. People can be suspended, from their institution based on this. They can be forced to take classes that they don't feel they need. It can really derail somebody's educational path and life path. So it's worth a chat with your kids.
Definitely, definitely. And especially if your child wants to go to medical school, let's say they're in grad school and all of a sudden they've always wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it may be, and they get in trouble and then all of a sudden they're expelled and, sayonara to their career because
Absolutely.
all those dreams can really be washed away with an accusation, especially if they're found responsible. Um, and then what about Lainey, like with parents that are thinking, okay, so I talk with them, I'll tell them to be careful with their communication. Now, what about their own personal safety? Like what kinds of things should I be telling them, or what kinds of things shall we be discussing at home? I know sometimes I not sometimes, I always think about the workplace. So many times graduate students, whether it's from high school, college, or graduate level, because we all get those summer jobs, we all get long-term jobs, whatever it may be. These kids sometimes really do not recognize or realize that there can be perpetrators in your workplace, that individuals are not always safe, that not every adult can be trusted. Your supervisor probably, hopefully, will be someone you can trust, but should you go in blindly?
Yeah, and it's always a difficult situation, because somebody starting off in grad school and they go to a professor who makes inappropriate comments, compliments someone on how they're dressed or how they look. That's completely inappropriate. How many students do you know want to go and rat on the professor that's going to help, with their career and getting a good grade? What I've always told my boys, and I will continue to reiterate, is that they have to have a voice. In this world, you have to have a voice. You have to be able, um, to advocate for yourself. And, you know, fortunately, my boys know they've got a great support system in our family, and in friends, and they know who they can talk to. So, I've always told my boys, that they need to be not only aware of their safety, but the safety of their close friends. And if they see something happening with a close friend, that they can be their voice too. So the key to all this is communication. And if something feels off, it probably is off. And that you don't have to run and tell on someone, but talk to someone, see if what you're feeling is, appropriate or not. And then you take it from there. Take it one step at a time, but you have to have a voice.
Yeah, very true. Reminding kids they have a voice. I guess for parents, make sure that your kids know that their voice has to be appropriate, and then remind them that they have the voice to use in case anything inappropriate happens to them,
Absolutely.
which I think is probably going to sound so simplistic, but truly I think is the key. using that voice, using that communication. I think you hit it spot on, Lanie. I know I've seen so many situations and cases where individuals go out into, whether it's within the education system when they get those positions or jobs during the school year, or outside of that, graduation time, and they're in these work settings, and all of a sudden they're with someone that they feel they can trust, and they're doing things that are inappropriate, whether it's verbally, physically, emotionally. And sometimes it's just a matter of communicating with the right individuals to get you that help to fix it, change it. Whether it's going back to Title VII, whether it's HR, you know, or maybe your own mom or dad, or a hotline, just making a quick phone call just to
Yeah,
check in, just to see if you can get some opinion or advice from somebody else. Um, and I think it's good for parents to know that you can discuss that with your kids.
absolutely. And I was thinking, there are certain topics that kids never want to talk to their parents about. Um, especially if your child has a significant other, or they're in a relationship, or if they're just kind of sowing their oats and having fun. But how many people really sit down and say, this is why sexting is not appropriate or a good route to go, especially with somebody that you don't know. And the reason I bring it up is I've had numerous Title IX cases at the college level that involved sexting and photographs, um, of somebody who thought that they were in a mutual consensual relationship that goes sour and then becomes a Title IX, and then it's all out there. So I know that it may be difficult, especially for college age kids and younger adults, to resist the temptation and be flirtatious. But again, I always tell my boys, anything you put in writing, you have to assume at some point down the line could be exposed. So really think about that text before you hit send.
That makes me think about, I've had a few situations kind of similar to one another where students feel, in some ways, I guess, flattered that a professor might be giving them extra attention. And then phone numbers are exchanged, communication begins, seems friendly, on the up and up at the start. And then all of a sudden there might be some inappropriateness. Then maybe some bars are, visited and frequented with some drinking, and now jokes are happening. Now things are a little bit more, no longer just this is my professor, but this now becomes a little more feeling like the equal playing field. This is my friend. This is like somebody I'm close to. He's my professor, but he's my buddy. Um, and I've seen it where all of a sudden then there's some text messages and some nude photos are being sent. And then it's like a surprise, maybe to a student that is not expecting that. But when you're reading the information and that engagement is there, and there's been a little bit of flirtation, and you can sense this flirtiness, you know, um, I think another reminder is, just remind students, kids, your children, that that communication can easily step over boundaries, whether they intend it to or not. And, that includes with text messaging. Sometimes people might read into something a little differently than what you actually mean it to be. And you might accidentally be inviting something over that you didn't necessarily mean to invite.
Absolutely. And listen, we're all human, and we know that it feels good to be flattered, and it feels good, for somebody, who's single and looking to get those flirtatious text messages. But you have to be very careful. And listen, one of my biggest pet peeves, I've had a couple of Title IX cases involving a student and faculty. I, you know, the faculty has a higher duty of care, okay, over a student. So a faculty member, a professor, a teacher that is even allowing that line to be crossed on the friendship level, I have an issue with that. Um, But, again, I think that what always worries me is that there are, people out there that don't feel like they have a voice and they're intimidated and it's scary and they don't want to get anyone in trouble. Um, but you know what? You gotta realize that when you go out there, especially into college, graduate school, workforce, you're an adult. You're only responsible for yourself. And you need to be able to vocalize when you feel like something just isn't right.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, Lainey, I think to wrap up today, we're doing a brief one today, but I think to wrap it up, I think it's again a reminder to parents for Mother's Day month, moms out there listening, talk to your kids about communication. Talk to them about appropriate communication with others, around others, whether it's directly at them or not, people in the vicinity listening.
Yeah.
Have that communication be appropriate. And then also just remember that communication is important. If something is felt, they feel something's wrong, that somebody's doing something towards them, remind them that they can communicate with you as a parent or communicate with someone else in order to ensure that they are safe and that they are okay. You would not want things to escalate in any which way. And so that communication is there to help preserve their safety and, their peace of mind. Lainey, what do you think? Any last words for tips for moms and parents for this month?
I just say hats off. The toughest job I've ever had is being a mom. And, I've been an attorney for 30, almost 30 years. Um, and just make sure that you keep the, open line of communication with your kids. It's really, the best tool that we have to guide them through life.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lainey, and happy Mother's Day to you for this month.
Thank you. And you too.
Thank you. And everyone out there, again, like us if you've been enjoying our what we're doing, and if you can potentially subscribe to us, great. Aside from that, to all the moms out there, happy Mother's Day and happy early Mother's Day, and have a wonderful celebration with your kids if they're graduating this season. And we wish safety and wellness to everyone. So thank you so much for joining us.